to our live. Hello, everyone. My name is William Plotnick, and I'm the executive director of Cineli Amici, a nonprofit organization and international platform dedicated to exhibiting, distributing, and digitizing repertory Brazilian cinema. I want to thank you for tuning into this book launch event for Towards an Intermedial History of Brazilian Cinema, a recent publication that presents a new history of Brazilian cinema based on its dialogue with other arts and media. Towards an Intermedial History of Brazilian Cinema, which is available for purchase now, is edited by Lúcia Nagib, Luciana Corrêa de Araújo, and Tiago de Luca, and the book is published by Edinburgh University Press. We're thrilled to have with us here today to celebrate the launch of Towards an Intermedial History of Brazilian Cinema numerous scholars who have contributed to this book, including Alessandra Brandão, Albert El Duque, Consuelo Lins, Flávia Cesarino Costa, Gustavo Furtado, Ian Christie, Lúcia Nagib, Luciana Corrêa de Araújo, Margarida Adamati, Martin Boignet, Rafael de Luna Freire, Ramayana Lira, Samuel Paiva, Stefan Solomon, Susana Rec Miranda, and Tiago de Luca. And some of these people might be in and out of the event space. Not everyone will show up on screen, but these are all the hopeful attendees for today. While I don't have sufficient time to read the bio and written chapter titles of each contributor, needless to say that those who have contributed to Towards an Intermedial History of Brazilian Cinema represent some of the world's leading Brazilian film historians and scholars. I encourage everyone to check out their bios in the opening pages of the book, and I look forward to hearing more from them about the ideas they shared in their respective chapters throughout this event. In addition to these book contributors, with us today are three very special guests who have all done groundbreaking research into the concept of cinematic intermediality. These include Agnes Pethu, Cecilia Melu, and Julian Ross. We will have the opportunity to hear from Agnes, Cecilia, and Julian shortly as they share with us their thoughts on the book. Before we begin, I just want to make a few notes about the structure of this event. Once I finish this very brief introduction, we're going to begin this book launch event with opening statements from the editors of Towards an Intermedial History of Brazilian Cinema, Lúcia Nagib, Luciana Corrêa de Araújo, and Tiago de Luca. Following this, we'll have the opportunity to hear follow-up statements from Agnes Pethu, Cecilia Melu, and Julian Ross. Finally, we look forward to having an open dialogue among the book contributors with us in response to these opening statements. Throughout this event, I'll be hopping back in to moderate the conversation as needed, while also staying behind the scenes with my partner Glennis Cardozo, monitoring the chat box here on YouTube and moving the participants off and on screen. We encourage anyone joining us in the audience to share their thoughts and ideas on what is being said, and to ask any questions should you have any. People should feel free to write in Portuguese or English in the chat box, and Glennis will be here to help us translate into English any comments or questions in Portuguese. So at a risk of not stepping on any of the upcoming speakers' toes, by giving an introduction to this book, or the multifaceted project which preceded it, Towards an Intermedial History of Brazilian Cinema, exploring intermediality as a historiographic method, which took place between 2015 and 2019, I thought I would share a quick personal note and then pass it off to Lúcia Nagib. When I first began to learn about Brazilian cinema in 2017 through a class on Cinema Novo by Richard Penha at Columbia University, I was feeling truly lost as to how to expand my understanding of Brazilian cinema history beyond the older English texts that I was able to find in the library and the Brazilian cinema textbook we were required to read during class. At the time, there wasn't the Criterion Collection or my local New York City art house cinemas to turn to discover more about the history of Brazilian cinema. However, the work being done by the team of scholars as part of the Intermediate project at the University of Reading, which was freely accessible to all, had enormous impact on me, and I think I can say with confidence that Cineli Amici, which we founded much later in 2019, wouldn't be around were it not for it. During the class by Richard Penha, I began to fall in love with the great classics of Brazilian cinema, at that time without even a word of Portuguese in my vocabulary. I was able to turn to the Intermediate project to truly connect with Brazilian film history and culture, while also beginning to understand the deep nuances and complexities of it. The Intermedial approach to Brazilian cinema history was not exactly typical. It ignored chronological or hierarchical perspectives in order to highlight underrepresented voices throughout this history. The project was also giving me new ways to think about the classics I had access to via library DVDs, while also allowing me to build a list of titles I needed to still see. And so to see a project that was so radically challenging previous hierarchies of Brazilian cinema in both the written and visual essay form, with a focus on providing access to this content in the English language, gave myself and my colleagues the confidence to start our own project that has a similar mission. Therefore, it's an honor for Cine Limite to be able to host an event for a book whose research so clearly paved the way for our own existence. I'm truly grateful for all your work, and I look forward to seeing its continued impact in the field of Brazilian cinema scholarship in the future. I want to thank again the book contributors who are joining us today, our guest speakers, and our audience in attendance. And with that, I will now pass the mic to Lúcia Nagib, who will kick off this event for us. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, my mic is on. Let me just shrink my screen here to have access to the little notes I've written. In the first place, I must say, I'm so surprised and so honored to hear these words from William, because from the very beginning, I've been such a great fan of Cine Limite. I think it's such an original proposal, and coming from the United States and with such passion, and every day discovering a new jewel from Brazilian film history that was unknown even to me. And now him saying about the influence that our project might have had in his work. I'm truly delighted to hear it and to see that we had any little minimal role whatsoever in the birth of this fantastic project, from which I myself am learning so much every day as I see the outputs and your effort for conservation, preservation of Brazilian film memory, the jewels that you discovered, the events that you organize around these jewels. So it's a great honor and the best reply I could wish for this project. This being said, let me give a general overview of what this project has been. And this book is actually one of the major outputs of this project, which was a big bilateral project entitled Intermediate Project, but it has a more mouthful kind of full title, which is Towards an Intermedial History of Brazilian Cinema, Exploring Intermediality as a Historiographic Method. This project was funded by the AHRC in the UK and FAPESP in Brazil, and it pursued two interrelated lines of inquiry. In the first place, it focused on cinema's nature as a mixture of arts and media in order to produce the first intermedial history of Brazilian cinema. And secondly, it tested the uses of intermediality as a historiographic method applicable to cinema as a whole. So to that end, we brought together scholars from the University of Reading in the UK and the Federal University of São Carlos, UFSCar, many of whom are present here today attending this event. And we also brought together three postdoctoral researchers. One of them is Margarida Adamati, who's there in Brazil, Stefan Solomon, who went back to his native Australia, and Albert El Duque, who went back to his native Spain. They combined, and we had 6 researchers on each side, PIs and co-Is, and they all combined a variety of expertises addressing this, this combination of film and other media and arts. So we also struck partnerships with non-academic institutions such as Tate Modern, the Cinemateca Brasileira, the theater company Antropophagia, and the Museum of Image and Sound in Brazil, Museu da Imagem e Som. Broadly speaking, intermediality refers to the interbreeding of artistic and technical medial forms. But for cinema, intermediality has increasingly been preferred over more established approaches such as comparative intertextual adaptation and genre-based studies for its wider premise that keeps the interrogation into the properties of the medium constantly on the critic's horizon. And Agnes Peto is one of the most the greatest expert in thinking along the lines of the questioning of the medium itself all the time, permanently. So our project looked at these medial interstices, intercultural encounters, and creative clashes, where the specificities of cinema are questioned and refertilized into new forms. As has been the case in many world cinema traditions from its early days, Brazilian cinema has combined extra filmic, artistic, and cultural forms, both local and imported, resulting in an original aesthetic blend. Artists coming from theater, opera, dance, music, circus, radio, television, and the plastic arts left a distinctive mark on film production in the country. And my colleagues are going to go down into these different media and how they interacted with cinema across Brazilian film history. The Project Intermedial proposed that these intermedial encounters entail the breaking of boundaries between local and imported traditions, high and popular cultures, avant-garde and commercial practices, passive and active spectatorship, classical and modern narrative forms, thus constituting a democratic space par excellence for artistic and social expression. We have argued that the intermedial method offers the advantage, as William has said, of a non-linear and non-hierarchical approach to film history. So the project suggests that the different phases of a national cinema can be framed as comparable and interrelated creative peaks, a method we deem more productive than teleological schemes deriving from evolutionary chronologies and classical modern or centered periphery models, which inevitably leads to the privileging of certain film forms over others, on the restrictive basis of medium-specific qualities. The project has so far produced 126 publications, of which this book is a major one, as I said at the beginning, which responds to the project's first line of inquiry, that is, the production of an intermedial history of Brazilian cinema. The next output, major output, responding to the project's second line of inquiry, is coming out soon, next June. I'm so proud that Stefan Solomon has co-edited this book with me, and we have several contributors participating in this discussion today. And the title of this book is The Moving Form of Film, Historicizing the Medium Through Other Media. So this book is coming out in June with the Oxford University Press. And it will test the applicability of the intermedial historical method to cinema as a whole. So now I'll hand over to Luciana, who's going to give some more details about the book itself. Thanks for your patience. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Lúcia. Can you listen to me? Okay. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. First, thanks very, very much, William Plotnick and Glenis Cardoso, and the wonderful organization Cine Limite for hosting and organizing this launch. Well, editing a book, and in English, was a challenging task for me. But I was lucky enough to work with good friends and amazing scholars, Lúcia and Tiago, who are experienced, rigorous, and yet very generous editors. So thank you very much, Lúcia and Tiago. And also, the editing work owes much to our all-star list of contributors with their stimulating research and insightful analysis. This book is in part an outcome of the first Intermedial conference, which also has had the title Towards an Intermediate History of Brazilian Cinema, that we organized at the Federal University of São Carlos, Universidade Federal de São Carlos, in November 2016. Many contributors presented a first draft of their chapters at the conference, while others were invited by us afterwards to write essays for the book. I like to think that this book contributes to and dialogues with the rich line of works dedicated to Brazilian cinema history, both in Brazil and abroad. To name just a few, and considering those with a broader temporal scope, I should mention Alex Vianney's trailblazer Introdução ao Cinema Brasileiro, published in 1959, Paulo Emílio Salles Gomes' historical essay Panorama do Cinema Brasileiro, 1896-1966, the two seminal books written by Jean-Claude Bernardet on Brazilian cinema history, Cinema Brasileiro, Propostas para uma História, in 1979, and Historiografia Clássica do Cinema Brasileiro, 1995, and more recently, the 2018 book Nova História do Cinema Brasileiro, edited by Fernão Ramos and Sheila Schwartzman. Among the books published abroad should be mentioned Le Cinéma Brésilien, edited by Paulo Paranaguá in 1987, Brazilian Cinema, edited by Robert Stam and Randall Johnson in 1995, and Lisa Shaw and Stephanie Denison's Brazilian National Cinema, published in 2007. To a greater or lesser extent, all these works address relations between Brazilian cinema and other arts and media. In our book, the ambition is not only to bring intermediality to the fore, but also to adopt it as a method in order to reframe Brazilian cinema history, investigating works, personalities, practices, and connections not yet explored, or shedding new light, pursuing other perspectives on those already studied. In the title of the book, as important as Intermedial History of Brazilian Cinema, is the word towards. As is pointed out in the introduction, this history, and I would add, the many histories of Brazilian cinema are permanently in the making. And we are very proud and that we hope to join this process and to contribute to it. That's it. So, Tiago, please.
Thank you, Luciana. First of all, I would also like to thank William for organizing this event. We are all very grateful. And also thank you to all contributors who have agreed to be here. And also thank you to everyone who is also watching us. And as Lucia and Luciana have already explained, this book arose out of a larger research project. And I feel I should say that I was not part of that, originally part of that research project. So it was a mystery when they invited me to edit this book with them. But of course, I was extremely flattered and honored when they invited me to join the editorial team. And I feel I should say that this book was in many ways a tremendous learning experience for me. As someone who is from Brazil with research interests in Brazilian cinema, I learned a great deal from the two editors whose expertise in Brazilian cinema is truly magnificent and unparalleled, but also from all the authors who have contributed to this book. And one final thing I wanted to say before moving on to talk about the structure of the book is that a substantial, I think, number of chapters that make up this book are the fruit of extensive archival research. So I think we are really looking here at a number of chapters that uncover precious materials from during years of research. And I think this is a feature of the book that makes it particularly rich in terms of its historical dimensions. So I feel I should say that. But now I want to move on and to talk about the structure of the book. And as has already been mentioned, one of the aims of this project was to really to move away from traditional chronological accounts. So when deciding on the organization of the book into 4 different parts, we really felt that the book had to be organized thematically rather than chronologically, and especially in relation to the different intermedial relations recurrent through the history of Brazilian cinema. So this means that each part contemplates many different eras of Brazilian cinema. And I will now try to share my screen so that you can all see the book. And hopefully that will be straightforward. Can you see the book?
Yes.
Yes, great. So I'm not going to really go and mention chapter by chapter, but I just thought I would talk very briefly about how we structured each part. So the first part, which is called intervisuality, the focus here is on the intermedial interactions between cinema and other visual arts. And this includes panoramas, comics, photography, visual installations, and video art, and ranging from early cinema through to cinema marginal and contemporary cinema. The second part of the book, and I'm going to try and so that you can see all chapters, which is called The Empire of Music, in many ways provides a counterpoint to the first part, in that the main focus here is music, and specifically the relationship between cinema and music in Brazil. And here, again, there is also a wide-ranging exploration of other arts and media, including theater, the music industry, carnival, radio, and music videos. The third part of the book is called Entertainment Circuits. And as its title indicates, the focus here is on the media industries from which many intermedial films are born, with many chapters again focusing on theater, radio, carnival, and television. And finally, the final part of the book, from impure cinema to cosmopoetics, builds on André Bazin's foundational idea of impure cinema and extends it to the idea of the total work of art, covering intermediate relations as diverse as the ones found in the work of Eduardo Coutinho, the queerness of intermediality in relation to maps and mapping, and finally the cosmopoetics of Glauber Rocha's Earth trilogy. So I think that's it from me, and I look forward to reading, to hearing the other participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Luciana, Lucia, and Tiago. I'm going to now invite to the screen Agnes Petro, Cecilia Melu, and Julian Ross, who have follow-up statements about the book and who will be sharing their thoughts about it as well. So bear with me 1 second here. Whoops. Okay. I think we're all here. Let's start with Agnes, and then we'll go to Cecilia and Julian. Thanks again for being here, all three of you, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, hello everyone. I think I'm the first then to speak about this wonderful book. And as Tiago has just presented, this is an impressive collection of essays. The sheer size of the book and the number of essays included is really awe-inspiring and wonderful. Thank you for inviting me to speak about this. And so I'm not even going to try to summarize what is in the book, but maybe try to speak about the relevance of this approach, an overall evaluation of this book. And if I had to say, I think one sentence about this book, it would be that it is ambitious and challenging, with the emphasis on all three keywords included in the title. So with regards to intermediality, with regards to cinema, and the history of cinema. So why? Because it, first of all, it dares to adopt the concept of intermediality for the study of film. You might not think this is such a daring thing to do, but perhaps because Edinburgh University Press is actually a pioneer in this respect, as it has a whole series of books dedicated to intermediality, and which is wonderful. But if you look at the repertoire of other publishing houses or the general topics of conferences proposed or the topics of individual papers delivered at major film conferences around the world, you will see that intermediality does not feature prominently at all. So also looking from the other angle in the wider area of so-called intermediality studies, which became fashionable sometime around the 1990s, then faded a little and seems to have regained momentum in the last few years. So regarding intermediality studies as a wide umbrella term encompassing the totality of theoretical researches or analysis which address the notion of intermediality, we see that studies about film are also in minority compared to studies about literature, for example. So as a matter of fact, with regard to matters concerning intermedial aspect of cinema, this is still a fairly untrodden path. So the sheer quantity of the writings published in this book, along with the many other books and publications resulting from this truly amazing research project, which is perhaps, I have to say, the most comprehensive and productive research projects I have ever encountered. And of course, the quality of the research poured into these writings compellingly argues for the validity of intermediality as a productive approach to the study of film, for revitalizing the study of film by locating it at the interstices of other media. So if, as I said, this is still a fairly untrodden path, I think Lúcia Nagib and her colleagues have gathered a whole army to march along this path and sweep the readers along and challenge them to follow in their footsteps. This is a hard act to follow, by the way, so a real challenge indeed. So now, this volume is further challenging because it not only addresses issues of intermediality, but proposes it as an innovative new method to look at the history of the totality of a national cinema, of Brazilian cinema, focusing on the ways in which cinema has fostered relationships with the other arts and media from its early stages to today. And indeed, this has never been done before, not about Brazilian cinema, not about any other national cinema. This novelty lies not just in the focus on intermedial connections, but in the way they approach national cinema and film history, in the abandonment of chronology or hierarchical approaches, in which early cinema, modern art films, documentaries, avant-garde or commercial practices can be analyzed side by side with the same set of tools. So what are the gains of such a daringly new approach to the historiography of cinema? I see this in many areas. First of all, I think that the metaphor used in the book itself of the kaleidoscope that the authors use in the introduction also sums it up perfectly. By abandoning chronology and the idea of an evolution in the domain of the arts, it is able to offer a point of view that encompasses cinema's cultural richness and aesthetic complexity. On the other hand, however, this does not mean an ahistorical approach, but just like in the case of a kaleidoscopic image, this is a cross-section that cuts through and captures in a specific arrangement a particular configuration, a set of intermediate relations that are revealed from a certain point of view. And this configuration is always very much historically embedded, as characteristic of a certain age and embedded in a media archaeology that is itself not conceivable as an evolution towards something, but as a network of connections that spans times and space, as many of the analyses of the book emphasize. Accordingly, I believe the book also significantly argues for seeing intermediality not in abstraction, but as something that can only be conceived in such forever changing permutations. Also, aside from the possibility of revealing a far more complex picture of national cinema as compared to traditional film historical analysis, what such an intermedial approach brings to the fore most eloquently is not just this kaleidoscopic vision of a cinema as a phenomenon cutting across higher and lower cultural registers, but a cinema that is in this way not torn away from the complex sensorial, geographical, political, material, technological, and cultural reality that it comes from and that it reflects, that it embodies in its texture. I am referring, of course, to the radically innovative idea of conceiving intermediality, to quote Lúcia Nagib, as a passage to reality, not just as something that connects media, an idea that was so beautifully presented by the essay film directed by Lucia and Samuel Paiva entitled Passages. And I think this idea of passages, even if not always referenced explicitly, it discreetly underpins the analysis, as each chapter brings into focus different aspects of the connection of art and life. In this respect, I believe the main argument for an intermediate study of film that this book promotes is that it not only revitalizes, refreshes our view of cinema, but it resituates film studies into its, I quote, natural habitat. If early cinema theorists strive for the autonomy of film studies and the revelation of the unique specificities of cinema, I believe that such an approach can effectively reinsert cinema into a more natural context as a live entity itself, and not as an abstract text or an aesthetic object. It is not by chance that intermediality is associated so strongly in the last part of the book with the cosmic vision of the entire world. It is also not by chance that the very same part connects cosmopoetics with references to Bazin's idea of rehabilitating the notion of impurity. Intermediality in this approach dares to address the impurities of cinema and offer them center stage. Some may argue that this is a distorted view. I would say that this is both a regained complexity of vision and a specifically revealing focus. In this respect, I found, for example, Tiago de Luca's analysis symptomatic. In his chapter, he writes about Laura Mulvey's idea of the pensive spectator emerging through the gesture of pausing the image, and of films that invite such an attitude from the viewer through insertion of photographs or the photographic stillness of the image. Intermediality as a whole, not just the performativity of the photographic, can be seen to work in a similar way. If we concentrate, select, and bring into focus the relationship between media, we often find out and can contemplate exciting hidden features of society and of the world. Aside from being a radically new kind of historiography, the book reads eminently as relevant film theory and a relevant theory of intermediality as well, demonstrating from many vantage points how moving images can make us contemplate the world through the marvelous and challenging impurity of cinema. I have to confess that I spent most of last week feverishly reading the chapters and seeking out the films and watching, of course, clips available on YouTube. It has been not only an intellectual challenge, but a most enjoyable journey in and out of Brazil, to quote also Nagib's film, through this book on intermediality. So thank you for this wonderful experience, and I would recommend to any of our listeners or viewers to open the book and start this marvelous journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. I think that it's me now, so I'll just go ahead and say that, first of all, I'd like to thank Lúcia, Luciana, and Tiago for inviting me to this incredible book launch alongside so many of you that I deeply admire and that I have had the chance to encounter throughout my career between the UK and Brazil. This is a deeply effective space for me, from my sensei and dear friend Lúcia Nagib to some of the most wonderful scholars I have had the pleasure of meeting, including, of course, Luciana and Tiago, Professor Chrissy from Birkbeck, where I did my PhD, the department at UFSCar, Universidade Federal de São Carlos. Even if I was there before the arrival of the most amazing team of scholars, Luciana, Flavio, Samuel, Susanna, friends from University of Reading, where I have presented my work in so many wonderful occasions, and those from different Brazilian universities that I, always really look towards for inspiration. So thank you so much. And it's also such an honor to have been invited alongside Agnes Petor. She's a light to all of us, always illuminating our research and helping us understand cinema and intermediality, and Julian Ross, whom I had the chance to meet some time ago as well in the UK, and has the incredible career that I've been following as well from a distance through Lucia. So thank you so much. So the HRC FAPESP project, which this amazing book is connected, the project towards an intermediate history of Brazilian cinema, has been a landmark in Brazil-UK academic relations in the field of arts and humanities. And it has spawned so many different publications, events, books, conferences, and films that its lasting influence on the way that we understand Brazilian cinema history is only beginning to be felt, I think, and will certainly have implications far beyond. Moreover, intermediality as a historiographic method has the potential, as has been noted, to reconstruct many other histories of cinema still caught in teleological approaches that tend to obscure the importance of cinema's hybrid nature. I have had the chance to put this method to the test in my own study of Chinese cinema's intermediate relationship with Peking opera, with productive results. So I believe that the first seeds of this non-binary understanding of the cinema can be found in Lucia's groundbreaking Towards a Positive Definition of World Cinema, which is an essay I always go back to because I do believe in its groundbreaking powers. And it was an essay published in 2006, which draws on Robert Stam and Ella Shohat's foundational unthinking Eurocentrism to refute the binary division between center, Hollywood, and periphery, the rest of the world, proposing instead a polycentric, democratic, and inclusive approach to the study of world cinema. So world cinema, taking as a polycentric phenomenon, hoped to reestablish equilibrium in film history, as generally speaking. It issued dominance discourses, usually forged under the auspices of the so-called market forces, that tend to disregard the importance of cultural specificities in shaping cinematographic tendencies in different parts of the world. By the same token, arguing against the binary scheme also meant revisiting the understanding of certain cinema movements as resistance to Hollywood's hegemony. One such example is, of course, Latin American's third cinema movement, which ensued from the Brazilian cinema novo in the 1960s, a cinema made in the periphery of capitalism in the third world and working as a form of resistance. The polycentric approach was at odds with the claim that third cinema is an alternative in the face of a norm. It further challenged the enormous impact of post-colonialism on film theory, which was felt especially from the early 1990s onwards due to the rise of cultural studies. The post-colonial approach occupied the vacuum left by the resistance movements of the 1960s, shifting the focus of the class struggle to the plight of the oppressed minorities. Approaches to cinema through the lens of post-colonial theory are evidenced in the proliferation in film studies of adjectives such as migrant, diasporic, hybrid, transnational, etc. And these and other approaches are therefore concerned with highlighting a type of cinema, accentuating its difference, presenting it as the other of Hollywood. Thus, even if they appear as alternatives to the Marxist perspective that contrasts core and periphery, they perpetuate, despite themselves, a binary view of world cinema. So world cinema as a method, as proposed then by Lúcia Nagib, had hoped to eradicate such binary assumptions and to reposition meanings by challenging the diachronic and dichotomist obsession that informs film theory since André Bazin's division between classical and modern cinema. Distinctions perpetuated also by Gilles Deleuze's categories of movement image and time image, and more recently by Jacques Rancière's in his theorization of a representational and aesthetic regime of the art, respectively associated with Hollywood and Bazinian realism. So intermediality as a historiographic method shares, in my view, this democratic impulse that I have traced very briefly now. And this book shows, as this book shows, it also manages to free the study of a national cinema from what could be mistaken as closed boundaries. Quite the contrary, it reveals how a national cinema and Brazilian cinema in this specific case is created from the commingling of different media and art forms, local and imported traditions, high and popular cultures, and I quote from the book's introduction, thus constituting a democratic space par excellence for artistic and social expression, end of quote. So the book's international theme also and the transnational output of this landmark research project are also testament to the achievements of this research initiative. The intermediate method here also embraces what Petor has called a parallax historiography by moving away from chronological or hierarchical approaches. So as is well known, Western notions of time have shaped temporal understandings around the world and to considerable extent have been imposed on the rest of the world. Moreover, as noted by historian Lynn Hunt, it is possible to trace a strong association between modernity and history as a discipline. And I quote, modernity not only gave history new roles in explaining the past and immobilizing the past as the basis for the new secular community of the nation, but also became though not for everyone and not always, the telos of historical development. The stage theories of history helped enshrine the modern civilized nations as the ultimate end of historical development, end of quote. So moving toward a non-teleological history has been a liberating force in the humanities in the second half of the 20th century, and it is high time that film studies embraced new historiographies, such as the one put forward by the authors of this book. The liberating force of intermediality, finally, can also be employed as a method alongside other modifiers, as proposed, for instance, by Ramayana Lira and Alessandra Brandão in their queering intermediality. So this pairing of these two terms And it also allows us to move away from Hank Osterling's what Hank Osterling termed the utopia of the Gesamtkunstwerk, and towards the heterotopia of intermediality. So Osterling, as well as Petot, have been crucial voices in advocating for the in-between of intermediality or intermedialities, stressing the need to focus on the epistemological, ethical, and political status of being in between, searching for new emancipatory possibilities. So moving away from the total work of art, from the Gesamtkunstwerk, is something that Nagib also proposes through different routes in her chapter on Glauber Rocha. And I would like to have time to actually comment on the whole book, but obviously we're very limited here. So I will just end with a question and a sort of a provocation for Lucia and for all the authors of the book. So if we understand cinema as a heterotopia of intermediality, doesn't this solve the problem of film medium's deficiencies in dramatic expression? Is this deficiency or failure of film to express itself that would lead to different art forms and media the very deficiency of reality, of the objective real, in that it needs something else to help us make sense of it? Does intermediality mean turning its back on the specificity of cinema, as suggested, or could it simply be what cinema is? That is a heterotopia, a heterotopic space. So thank you so much, and I look forward to debating with you.
Okay, so now it's my turn. Hello, everybody. My name is Julian Ross. I was one of the members, proud to be one of the members of the advisory board for the AHRC FAPESP project. And I had the pleasure to see this project grow from an idea into a fully formed mega project that encompassed, I just heard, 126 publications. That's truly impressive, but also film seasons, other events, conferences, one of which I was able to attend at the University of Reading. A real example of how to fully realize the potential of an idea into a research project that is international and interdisciplinary and truly collaborative between not just institutions but individuals. So it's been a real pleasure to play a very, very small part in it, and especially to witness this idea grow into this form. I very much look forward to reading the moving form of film as well, and it's been a real pleasure, just like Agnes mentioned before, to spend the past week plowing through the many magnificent contributions in this book towards the intermedial history of Brazilian cinema. I had the pleasure also to be a PhD student under Lúcia Nagib, and through reading this book, I recalled our many conversations in her office back in the day. She was at University of Leeds, now at Reading, of course, talking about many things, of course, but my subject was Japanese cinema. And we kind of did our own mini version of this project, but with Japanese cinema, if I recall. We're discussing cinema and its interrelations with other arts, and different moments of film history and different ways of the comminglings that took place between the arts and cinema in Japan. And she showed a lot of knowledge, of course, on Japanese arts and cinema. And here I get to see, together in collaboration with Luciana and Tiago and all the contributors, another side of our knowledge and fascinations, which is, of course, Brazilian cinema. It's been wonderful to get to understand Brazilian film history through this different and novel approach, which is the intermediality as a historiographic method, not looking at it from a series of firsts, as also Michael Gillespie and Raquel Gates have written about, written against, excuse me, in their writings on Black cinema and its historiography, but a different form of history making, which is not non-evolutionary, non-teleological, as several of the speakers have already shared. It's been really truly exciting to experience learning about Brazilian cinema through this book and its kind of proposal of this intermediality as a historiographic method. So yeah, the breadth of scholarship in this book is truly astonishing. We read about pre and early cinema to recent audiovisual installations in contemporary art. And I believe, as others have mentioned, that this idea, intermediality as a historiographic method, will not just influence Brazilian film history and how it's researched, taught, and understood, but also other national histories as well. Of course, as a scholar invested in Japanese cinema, I immediately was imagining what an historiographic method of intermedial historiographic method of Japanese cinema might look like, and getting excited about the many different ways in which the history of cinema could be reestablished in that context. And I'm sure many others reading this edited collection will be intellectually stimulated in similar ways. So as the title of this book suggests, Towards, I see this book as a beginning rather than an end or something conclusive of reading film history through an intermedial lens. I believe the text, the edited collection, is ambitious, as it's been said already, and expansive, definitely, but not exhaustive, and opens up new terrains of possibilities. And that's what its true value, I think, here is a real contribution to film scholarship and intermediate scholarship. And I think for intermediality as a field of study, I think it encourages to bring the specificity of the national context as well into play, which I don't believe has been done as thoroughly, at least, as this edited collection. While I was reading through this edited collection, I was really intrigued by the tension that was coming out between intention and interpretation. And I want to quote Alison Butler's text here about Kao Guimarães. And I quote, in this instance, and she's talking about Kao Guimarães' first feature called Man of the Crowd. Okay, I quote, in this instance, the film is not informed by intermediality, but actually formed by it. Its world, which once again is visually disorientating, is composed to a large extent of other media, or seems to be, even when it's not. And I was really, I think this quote brings out this, at least a reading, an intermedial interpretation that's possible in the analysis and textual analysis of cinema, which I saw in a number of texts throughout the edited collection. So intermedial readings or interpretations that are informed by intermediality of particular film scenes, moments, and passages. I was intrigued by several texts, including Tiago's and Alison's, of course, making reference to lower marks and haptic visuality. And this was making me think of the possibilities of bringing affect as a field of study into intermediality, and possibilities of multimodal reading, of course, that is being fleshed out here in this kind of analysis, which talks about the feel or the texture of cinema, even though it's primarily, let's say, an audiovisual medium. And of course, there's many texts in the book discussing intention. So that meaning artists who are filmmakers who are involved in other arts, of course, like Glauber Rocha being one of the prime examples. And many moments of overt intermediality when different media, such as music, such as comics, are being overtly quoted, to quote, I believe, Lars Ellerstrom here, those moments bring the different possibilities, let's say, of intermedial readings of films. One being, again, I reiterate, intention. Let's say intention by the artists or their backgrounds, or the nature in which they quote other media being very overt, so visible and felt, but also the possibilities of intermediate readings into certain moments. So, as I mentioned before, I see this book as an opening rather than a closure. So I want to kind of close my short response with a few ideas or points I'd like to raise and discuss further with you, perhaps if we find a moment later. So one is, what is the in-between space between transnational and intermedial? So with this, I was also imagining while reading the edited collection, are there influences of other media from other national outputs, and has Brazilian cinema informed other arts in and outside of Brazil? This is one thing I think gets mentioned here and there throughout the text, but fully kind of I can imagine a more kind of thorough investigation of not just Brazilian cinema, but all other kinds of cinema, national cinemas as well. In my own, the second point I wanted to raise is related to my own work, where I tried to trace the word intermedia and how it was discussed within Japan in 1960s, or alongside other ideas within Japanese art theory and film theory that was discussed around the 1960s. What are their relationships? So what is how does intermediality figure in Brazilian film theory and film criticism would be something I'd love to hear more about. And then finally, what is the status of film within the other arts in Brazil? In what ways were the Brazilian films informing other arts within the national context? So there's a moment in Ismael Xavier's text where there's a discussion about the family trial moment in a Russia film, and how that kind of figured in other arts thereon. And it's just a brief moment in the text that made me think, oh, how I would love to know more about how cinema figured into the other arts, and perhaps made other art forms question their own boundaries by bringing cinema into them. So that basically concludes my short response here. But just to say at the end, it's a really wonderful book and a real pleasure to be here, and of course be part of the response with Agnes and Cecilia, whose work has really been valuable for my understanding of intermediality too. And for me, I feel intermediality not only opens up boundaries of cinema and proves that the boundaries of cinema is porous, but also the intermediate readings of cinema, I think, allow us to define cinema more clearly in the end, because we're pairing it with the other art forms. And I was able to see that being thoroughly fleshed out throughout this edited collection, which was a pleasure to read. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Julian, Agnes, and Cecilia. I'm going to now invite 10 contributors from the book onto the screen to respond to all the prompts, the questions, and the points that you three just brought up, in addition to Lucia, Luciana, and Tiago. So bear with me for one moment as I do that. In addition, while doing that, I'm going to read just a chapter of the particular authors as I introduce them. So I first want to introduce to the screen Ian Christie. Ian is author of the first chapter in the text, Traffic and Images, Visual Spectacle Before Cinema in Brazil. I next want to introduce Stefan Solomon. Where are you? There you are. Stefan is author of The Most Innocent Film of the Year, Comic Books, Sex, and Cinema Marginal. I next want to introduce Flavia Cesarino Costa. Flavia is author of Watson Macedo's Aviso aos Navegantes, Reflections on the Musical Numbers of Brazilian Chanchada. Bear with me 1 second here as I also add 2 more people. Next up, I'd like to introduce Albert El Duque. Albert is the author of, let me add Albert. Albert is the author of, Possessing Archival Images, Ghosts, Songs, and Films in Cartola, Música para os Olhos. Next, I want to introduce Samuel Paiva. Samuel is author of Music Video Aesthetics in Pernambucan Cinema. Next, I'd like to introduce Rafael de Luna Fried. Rafael is author of Synchronized Film Fever, amid the Radiomania, record, radio, and cinema at the dawn of the talkies in Rio de Janeiro. Next, I would like to introduce Margarita Adamati. Margarita is author of Gilda de Abreu's O Ébrio as a unique intermedial project. Next, I'd like to introduce Consuelo Lins. Consuelo is author of Impure Cinema as Method, The Last Films of Eduardo Coutinho. Next, I'd like to introduce Hemayana Lira de Souza and Alessandra Soares Brandão, coming in here. They are the authors of Queering Intermediality in Brazilian Cinema. And finally, I want to introduce Gustavo Furtado, who I'll have to exit the screen to put on it. But first, I'll read Gustavo's chapter, which is Intermedial Territories, Maps in Amazonian Moving Image. And I would like to, before I actually put him on the screen, because I'll get kicked off, I want to prompt you all to feel free to have an open dialogue. If you'd like to create your own order for speaking, I think that's great. I don't know if we all see each other on the same order on screen, but if so, it would be Ian Christie on the left, then Stefan, then Flavia, and so forth. So I think that would be great to follow, but also having an open dialogue and feeling free to interject at any point. I think that would be beautiful. So I'm going to exit here and put in.
Wow. Well, maybe I can, since I seem to be at the top left of the screen. Can you hear me? Good. And I'm going to have to leave, actually, maybe before the end of what looks like a very promising set of exchanges. But it's my fate in life to often be the author of the first chapter in a book, because I tend to write about things that come before cinema. And I guess my general feeling is that film scholars spend much too much time with movies. They really do tend to focus somewhat obsessively on film. And I suppose, having done that for some decades of my life, I am now in a phase of thinking that it's really important to fill in what came before movies, because cinema is a very recent and I think probably transient phenomenon. We seem to be definitely past the era of cinema as it has been. And so it's really important to think about what came before cinema, the 200 or 300 years of mediation that fed into cinema and left its imprint, which is what I've tried to do in my chapter. For me, it was a real journey of discovery. I knew of course, I came into film in the days of Glaba Rocha. I'm actually married to somebody who was the distributor of the Glaba Rocha films back in the 1970s. But since then, I guess I haven't had a close connection with Brazilian cinema. But I was fascinated to have a chance when I came to Brazil to make some discoveries. And I discovered two. I'll just mention very quickly two very exciting things. One was an exhibition that was on in São Paulo when I was there for the first time at the Itaú Cultural Center, called Secret Brazil. And that was an absolute stroke of luck. I learned such a lot about the prehistory of Portugal's relationship with Brazil during the colonial period from that exhibition. It was a fantastic stroke of luck. And it's really stayed with me as an exemplary exhibition that deals with processes of mediation and censorship long before cinema. And the other was to discover a book by Alice Truss, Alice Dubina Truss, about one cinema in Porto Alegre, the Teatro San Pedro. And this is, to me, was absolute inspiration. If you may not know the book, it focuses just on one theatre. It makes use of its unique archive. And it's something which I use in my other work outside of studying Brazil, because it's a fantastic record of showing just how a thriving theatre, which incorporated magic lanterns and all sorts of optical entertainments, started to incorporate film at the very end of the 19th century and in the early years of the 20th century. And just that close study of the evolving program of the Teatro San Pedro was a real open sesame for me, because it's a process that happened all over the world as big theaters, music halls began to incorporate film. It's really how cinema began. And here we have a study, a beautifully written, researched study in Brazil, which really is a landmark, I think, in terms of showing how this intermediality took place on the spot in Porto Alegre. And I learned a great deal from that. I also learned that there's a lot of work still to do on pre-cinema media in Brazil. And I hope there will be new generations of people coming forward to really dig into the thick 19th century and draw out some of those wonderful anticipations of cinema, which we find in the work of stereographers, photographers, and all the many other artisans who fed into what would become cinema. I've talked for too long, but it's very nice to see the other contributors. And I must say, I'm still enjoying the book when I get a chance to dive into it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. It's great to hear from you and to see everyone here, and it's wonderful to be part of this book. I was part of the Intermedial project. I was fortunate enough to be involved at the University of Reading for a couple of years with some wonderful colleagues from the UK and from São Carlos as well. And those years were a crash course for me in Brazilian cinema in lots of ways, and I'm still learning so much. But one of the things that I tried to focus on, and I'm still focusing on in the work that I've done on Brazilian cinema, is about the kind of lowest forms, or the bad cinema that emerges from Brazil, and what we can do with that from an intermedial vantage point. So thinking about intermediality, we can look at cinema in relation to the high arts, to opera, to some forms of music and literature. But I was also, and I'm still interested in how cinema relates to maybe some of the lower or more popular art forms with which it shares or shared a kinship. If we think of cinema as beginning life in some ways as being denigrated, as being kind of frowned upon as something for illiterate people, or fermenting sort of cultures that are not very literary or highbrow. Of course, it's come a long way since then, but in my chapter in the book, I look particularly at cinema in relation to comic books, which was a medium that formed in the way that we know it more or less around the same time as cinema towards the end of the 19th century. And so I tried to think about cinema, particularly in Brazil, cinema marginal from the 1960s in relation to comic books, since there are so many references that I found in cinema marginal films to comic books as a popular form. There's a film by Rogério Scanzella called HQ, Historias Quadrinhos, about comic books, a short film from 1969. But there are many other references dotted throughout. And I wanted to investigate why that might have been and to think that more fully. So in my chapter, I look at cinema marginal in relation to comic books, but also particularly in relation to these pornographic comic books called the catecismos that were made by secretly in a way by Carlos Zéfiro, which was a pseudonym for a public servant who worked in Brazil and made these pornographic comic books that were distributed covertly, and people would consume them covertly as well. And I've looked in particular at a film by João Calagaro called O Pornografo from 1970, which thinks about those comic books, those catecismos, and also thinks about the relationship more broadly to comic books as a form. So both to pornographic cinema and to comic books, and to think about how concentrating on that connection or the influence of comics on cinema might be able to reorient our understanding of film history in particular. So kind of that's the approach that I took in my chapter. There are various, I think, ways in which I've been informed, but one kind of guiding influence for that was a 2017 documentary film called Histórias que nosso cinema não contava, Stories Our Cinema Didn't Tell, by Fernanda Pessoa, which takes kind of a view of the dictatorship in Brazil, but only using images and footage from pornochanchada films. And I was interested in how someone could find in those films, which maybe people consider to be the worst, or have these kind of violent, misogynistic tendencies, and films that are almost unwatchable in some ways. It could find in those films a way to retell Brazilian history, and to think about how we might redeem or extract elements from those films to actually reevaluate them in different ways. So it was kind of very informative on my process. But that's enough from me. I'll allow you to read the chapter in your own time as well, but it'll be great to hear from everyone else. Thanks.
Thank you, Stefan. Can you hear me, guys? Well, I missed the time that we were working, because after that, Brazil education and research was destroyed. So it's very happy to see everybody here and to recall that science is possible and change ideas too. So I will speak very briefly about my chapter because you can read it. So I think what I've done is to have fun with research. So I would like to thank one person that it's not here, but it's very important to my research, which is João Luiz Vieira. All my work is based on his work, and also Lisa Shaw, because they were the pioneers that have somehow begun the thinking about chanchadas. And I researched the chanchadas too, especially the musical numbers. And the musical numbers, I researched them because of their so-called problems. So in the evolutionary history, they were considered trash and not well done. And because of that, I think the intermediate approach of these musical numbers is important, because we can rework on these problems. And like Cecilia Mello said, overcome this relationship between first word and third word in cinema. So it's not like this. We don't have this evolutionary thing, and we can begin to build something else. So in my chapter, I focus one film and all his musical numbers, and it's 16 musical numbers, because most of the film are musical numbers. And I would say the research in every musical number and find that the bad, for instance, a radio singer who does not dance or act very well, is that a problem? No. It has intermediate reasons for that. He comes from radio. The film actresses who dances and sings only in the films, but not on the radio. So she sings so-so. And the vaudeville comedian who does everything demanded by the scene, I mean Oscarito. So all this mixture, it's not a problem. It configures something else. And intermediality can help us understand this kind of heterogeneity. So I tend to consider, like Cecilia Mello, to cinema as a heterotopia of intermediality. Intermediality defines cinema. So we can find these things in many objects of research. So that's why I love the book, and I love to have had the opportunity to work, of course, with Lúcia Nagib and all the people who helped us. And I want to show my deep gratitude to Lúcia Nagib and Luciana for this opportunity. It was fun, and I think this is the very important thing. That's it. Go on, Albert.
Hello, good evening, everybody from Barcelona. It's very nice that 3 years and a half after I left Reading and returned to my city, there are still events happening related to Intermedial project. And it's beautiful because it's an excellent opportunity to meet some friends and to see beautiful people, which were absolutely important for a very important moment in my life. So it's very nice to be here today with you, talking and seeing your beautiful faces and listening you about your chapters. As everybody, I think I'm absolutely delighted to contribute to this book. My chapter is about the music documentary Cartola Música para os Olhos, Cartola Music for the Eyes, which is a music documentary about one of the most important figures in the history of samba, a figure who is very well known in Brazil, but not abroad. And in my chapter, I explore the ways in which the history of the story of Cartola, the biography of Cartola, is intertwined with the history of Brazil of the 20th century. And it is done with an intermedial interaction between the lyrics of the songs, the life of Cartola, the history of the country, archival images, fiction films, documentary images, and how all this intermedial mixture provides a very interesting ideas about different ideas, really, about the national Brazilian national identity and about the relationship between Brazil and its music. I think one crucial thing, I learned a lot of things in this project, but I learned, I want to share one of the many things that I learned in this project today with you. And it's a thing that was revealed to me by Christian Pasqual, who at that time was the coordinator was the international coordinator of the Inedit, which is a film festival devoted to music documentaries. The Inedit started in Barcelona in early 2000s and then expanded to other countries, for example, to Chile and to Brazil and to other countries. And then when I was in Sao Paulo doing my research, I met Christian Pasqual, who came from Barcelona to attend the Brazilian edition of Inedit. So the Brazilian edition of this festival devoted to music documentaries. It was nice because it's always nice when you are abroad and you meet someone from your own country, and then you talk about, oh, how are you feeling here, and so on. And then I asked him, what is the specificity of the Brazilian Inedit? So what is the thing that makes the Brazilian Inedit different from other Inedits all over the world? And then he didn't hesitate a single second. He didn't hesitate a second. He saw it very clearly, and he said to me, the difference is that the Brazilian Inedit is the one with a strongest with the strongest national section. So if you go to other inedits, the inedit in Santiago de Chile or the inedit in Barcelona, you find many music documentaries from all over the world, and some of them which are produced in Chile or in Spain and so on. But in Brazil, the national section is like half of the total. And the national documentaries, the documentaries produced in the country, are the ones which are more publicized and which attract more attention. So I thought very interesting that in a transnational endeavor, which is the Inedit Film Festival, there are some national specificities and how they reveal how an intermedial genre, such as music documentaries, has a specificity in the case of Brazil. So this is one of the things that I learned in this project, thanks to all the colleagues that helped me in my research, and this is one of the things that I try to put in my chapter. So yeah, just it's very nice to be here today, and I will be glad to talk with you today or later or another day or in person at some point. And Samuel, now it's your turn.
Thank you, Albert. In fact, thank you, all of you, starting with our friends who edited this book, Luciana and Tiago, made a wonderful work. And it's very nice to be with my colleagues here, contributors for the book. And of course, I have the opportunity of listening Agnes Beto, Cecilia Mello, Julian Ross. Is a great honor, it's a pleasure, and it's very nice to be here. Well, about my chapter, here's the second part of the book, The Empire of the Music, just after, before the Albert's chapter, and it's called Music Video Statics in Pernambucan Cinema, and is related to the production of films in the state of Pernambuco in the 1990s onwards, films which are related to the Mangue Beat musical genre, especially films directed by the filmmakers who took part on so-called Ali do movement. Music video was a key medium in the direction of film and music in these films, such as Baile Perfumado, Tatuagem, Amarelo Manga, Amor, Plástico e Barulho, are very important as films in which I have observed this connection with music video. As I discuss in this chapter, Pernambucan cinema jumped on the bandwagon of local music, which already benefit from a strong presence in the media, in particular television, in the form of music videos produced by bands such as Chico Sainz, Nação Zumbi, Mundo Livre S.A., Mestre Ambrósio, and many other bands. At the time, Recife's living conditions were so appalling that newspapers, for instance, the Washington Post, published that Recife was the fourth worst city in the world to live in. And for me, this crisis is something very important in terms of how intermediality can be considered in that context, because it's related to the reality itself, as Lúcia Nagib and I discussed it in the film Passages, which was already mentioned by Agnes Beto. Besides, the idea of the crisis is also connected to the narrative crisis created by the interference of a medium in another. I mean, the music video into the media film. Therefore, my aim is to highlight this possible difference, not only as a disorder in the film narrative and discourse, but also as an index of media archaeology implicated in the remediation of one medium into another, in a process which becomes evident through the intermediate strategies revealed in some musical videos, scenes, and films. In this case, I can remember the words of Agnes Pato when she was talking about the idea of media archaeology. The really question related to the strategies of intermediality in this chapter. These strategies are simultaneously related to historiographic and geographic dimensions. In other words, music video effects in films can be understood as a worldwide phenomenon. However, there are implications involved each case study. Hence, the following questions arise in my chapter. Given that film and music have historically been in dialogue throughout Brazilian film history, what would be specific to the Pernambucan case? How did technologies which expanded or converged at that moment, including vision and television, affect cinema? These are my questions in the chapter. An example of music video effect on the film is the scene in which Lampião in Baile Perfumado, he is with his wife and his gang on a boat, and he asks a musician to play a beautiful song. The musician is Siba, the Mestre Ambrosio band leader, who goes on to play the film's title song, Baile Perfumado, on a rabeca, a musical instrument of Arab origin, which was precursor to the violin. When the music begins, the whole mise-en-scène changes. The music becomes louder, and it's picked up by the non-diegetic track, become the main attraction. The images, in turn, slow down, changing the classical montage into musical video style. So to answer my question, first of all, it's necessary to consider the Brazilian context. In the Brazilian context, the arrival of MTV in 1990, which was a turning point in TV marketing, aesthetics, and techniques. Another question is to consider some kind of, how can I say, in this chapter, I argue that remediation between music video and cinema can elicit a variety of effects depending on their archaeologies, imply different forms of possible attraction. So you can see this presence of MTV, how can I say, style present in the films. You can see also the influence of local TV and short films, like, for example, O Mundo é uma Cabeça, the world is a head, who follows Chico Science's journey, filmed in a car driven by one multimedia artist from Recife throughout the streets of Recife at night. You can also see in a film like Tatuagem, for example, the reference of Super 8 format as important device in the history of Pernambucan film. You can also see, how can I say, attractions of the post-television era. Example of post-television music videos in films such as Amor Plástico e Barulho, Love, Plastic and Noise, directed by Renata Pinheiro, focused on the dispute between two female singers in search of celebrity. The film is a constant mirroring between television and the internet. Its aesthetic conception, including its soundtrack, pertains to the so-called brega and techno-brega music genre. Mixing this genre and alluding to their relationship with television and the internet, the fictional narrative of Love, Plastic and Noise is placed on the outskirts of Recife, in a poor neighborhood near the mangrove, where you can follow the band Amor com Veneno and the professional and professional rivals between the two singers, as well as their boyfriends and co-workers, all involved in popular show business. So by focusing on this intermediate environment, Renata Pinheiro's film presents a kind of music video archaeology that describes the whole process of remediation embedded in the film itself. The battle between the two singers mimics the dispute between the various media in film. So this idea of crisis or heterotopia in terms of, how Cecilia has provoked us to think about the idea of heterotopia, I think it's certainly welcome to this connection that I made between film and music videos. And I think the idea is that something related to the media archaeology involved in a kind of crisis, which is present when these two different media, such as film and music video, are putting together to reflect some kind of passage to reality. I think is that. Thank you.
Oh, I think it's my turn. My name is Rafael. I'd like to thank for inviting me this event, but also to inviting me to join the book. I want to praise this book because I think, in my personal opinion, in Brazil, we have a lot of edited collections that are built around the general idea, but in which the chapters usually don't dialogue too much. Different from that, this book, I think it's the result of a very well organized research group in the UFSCar. It was matured from an event, a very important event, in which we had a chance to discuss our researches and exchange ideas. So I think we have a very fine edited collection that I think it's very welcome to Brazilian studies. Well, my chapter is called Synchronized Film Fever Amid a Gramophone Radio Mania, Record Radio and Cinema at the Doors of the Talkies in Rio de Janeiro. And it was written from a very long research I've been conducting the last decade on the introduction of sound film in Brazil in the late 1920s to the beginning of 1930s. But in this chapter, I had a chance to focus in one single year, 1929, in one single city of Rio de Janeiro, and to focus on the intermediality of the early sound films. My study have been dedicated to the interconnection between production, distribution, and exhibition, and on the technological and economic dimensions of the introduction of sound. And I had a chance through the challenge of writing from an intermedial approach to interconnect this history of sound films with that of record and radio. I think in Brazilian film history, you usually think of the importance of radio in the 1930s, of course, because of main singers and composers that were very famous and were casted in the films, such as Carmen Miranda, etc. And I think this moment in the late 20s was an opportunity to think of other kind of connection, not only in terms of public, in terms of places of circulation, in terms of economical relations and technological similarities, but also how these intermediate approaches also changed the way the films were. You know, the place of popular songs from records or classical music from radio auditions, comic sketches from a stage play nature, but were also released in records, or lectures from intellectuals that were common in radio that were also in some of the first early sound films. So I think it's, I have been reading the book, I haven't finished, but so far I think we have a very innovative and creative way of approaching Brazilian film history with this method. And I think it will inspire new approaches to the history of Brazilian cinema, but also, as I expect in my case, also how this history can also renew the history, for example, of Brazilian music, of Brazilian radio, Brazilian records, Brazilian theater, and etc. So it's not only, I think, a very important book for Brazilian cinema, but also for Brazilian culture and any other many other kinds of medias and arts in Brazil. So thank you, and Margarida.
Present to be with all of you, research that I admire so much, and my colleagues from the Intermedial project. And I want to tell you something that you know, that the Intermedial project was for me one wonderful experience of work, research, and friendships. So I only can thank you, all of you, from this experience for me. I'll be brief. My chapter is about Gilda de Abreu. And Gilda de Abreu was the second woman to direct a feature film in Brazil. And among the pioneer filmmakers, she's the only one whose work was preserved. And she directed one of the biggest box office success in the history of Brazilian cinema, a film called O Ébrio, the Drunkard, that was seen in the Brazilian history as a melodrama or stage productions. So I try to understand the work of Gilda de Abreu and her husband, Vicente Celestino, as a collaborative work, authorship that was developed by both of them in 5 medias, radio, theater, cinema, book, and television. And I want to tell that O Ébrio was one of the biggest box office success, but always seen as a stage productions and spot of our Brazilian imagination in several mediums. O Ébrio was a great intermediate project that Gilda de Abreu and Vicente Celestino developed between 30 years. And I try to understand this film through intermediality, using the idea of the impurity worked by André Bazin and the concept of the in-between, and understand through film analysis the porous border that Gilda creates, seeing, for example, through star system, the division that Gilda de Abreu created between actor and characters, and to understand how Gilda de Abreu was not seen, but she was a great strategist. She was a great publicist to the film. And I try to understand the reference that and from the song O Ébrio in the sequences. And I try to understand the reflexive sequences she created, and she tried to make the audience feels that they are part of the film, and if to create the sensation of being in the stage should be and see the film. So this is a reflexive view of Gilda de Abreu's work that the history of Brazilian cinema didn't try to highlight. And the work I've done in this chapter is to understand this reflexive process that Gilda de Abreu created through theatrical space and through the intermediality from Vicente Celestino as a big star. That was the point that I tried to understand. Thinking about to see Gilda de Abreu not as a bad film director, but through intermediality, I think she could achieve another signification, another. Oh, sorry, I forgot. it was difficult to see Gilda Jabril through the traditional history of Brazilian cinema as a great director. And I tried to understand the work she done as a reflexive work through theater, because in the same year they launched the film, they launched again the stage web. And that's part of the work Gilda Jabril created as a great strategist. That is the work I've done, and I want to thank you to all of you for this opportunity.
Hi, hello everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I want to say also, as Flavia said, that it's a pleasure to be here now with this in this new situation. We live in Brazil with a lot of anguish the last month, so it's really a pleasure to be here with another horizon in our view. So the first thing I wanted to say is that, because every morning I wake up and I thanks everything we have done to be now in this another situation, political situation. I want to thank Lúcia, Luciana, and Tiago very, very much. It was really a pleasure to write the article I wrote to this book, because it was another way to revisit Eduardo Coutinho's film. So if I hadn't had this invitation, I wouldn't follow this way, this kind of analysis. And it's a pleasure also because I am in this book not only as an author, but also Tiago had made a wonderful analysis of my short film, Nannies. So I'm very glad to be in the book as an author and also with my short film. And so I will be brief. My chapters analyze the last phase of Eduardo Coutinho films, consisting of Jogo de Cena, playing, Moscow, A Day in Life, and Songs, works, shots in closed spaces, 3 of them in stage settings, based on unique strategies of mixing theater, television, and music. So impurity was really a central value in the filmmaker's way of thinking, in his way of viewing the world, and in his cinematographic practice. That it was possible to reconfigure career, particularly his last films, taking impure cinema as a method, an approach suggested by Lúcia Nagib and First Left, in which André Bazin's famous expression is he worked in a new key. So I put in the beginning of my article a quote by Coutinho where he says, purity doesn't exist. Purity and perfection are the only things that revolt me. He was very funny in saying things like that. He was really against purity. So he says, purity and perfection are fascist. My films are about life because life will always be imperfect, because life will always be incomplete. So it was very good to look after those kind of codes and way of things in interviews that Coutinho gave. So it was really another way of thinking his career and this last phase of his work. And I'm very grateful to can be. I could have done this because of this invitation. So thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to see Ramayana, Alessandra, and Flavia, and all this, Samuel, Gustavo, and the author that I don't know also. It's a pleasure to meet you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Consuelo. Thank you all for the company. I mean, this afternoon in Brazil, this morning in other parts of the world, this evening in other parts of the world. We are really glad to be here. Well, we are here together, me and Alessandra. I don't know, Alessandra, would you like to start by introducing yourself, maybe?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ramayana. It's a hard job to speak now after so many wonderful people who we admire so much, like Consuelo. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Flávia Cesarino Costa, my God, and everybody else, please. Rafael Luna, Margarida Damati, our friends from Socini, from in the studies, cinema studies in Brazil, Lúcia Nagib, you know you live in our hearts. Thank you so much, you and Luciana and Tiago, for having us in this book, in this party, we can call like that. That's it. I mean, what do you want to say?
Yeah, okay. So my name is Ramayana Lira de Souza. We, together with Alessandra, we wrote this chapter in this, oh my God, it's such a wonderful volume. I don't know about you guys, the other contributors, but it's like, oof.
Wow, yeah.
No, I mean,
absolutely,
it's like,
yes.
What are we into, right? So thanks to the editors, Luciana and Tiago. Congratulations on putting together this terrific volume. And of course, me and Alessandra and I would say thanks for the generous and patient editorial work, because we know that it takes time, right? And it takes this generosity, intellectual generosity, right? When you have such a large number of contributors from different places, from different backgrounds, from different approaches to intermediality. So
it is really a great privilege.
It is.
I mean, and challenge to be part of this team of collaborators, many of whom we know personally. Consuelo, Cecilia, Lúcia, Tiago, Cecilia, so many people, and all of whom we admire intellectually and academically so much. I mean, Agnes Petto, Julian Ross. I don't think you remember us, Julian, but I think we saw you. I can't remember if it was in Sheffield, in a kind of event we were there, or in Leeds, but I remember your research. I saw you. It's really amazing to be here. I mean, and listen to you. It's really great. Cecilia, we are really close. Agnes Petto, I mean, maybe Ramayana can talk about it, because we went to Cluj-Napoca in 2012.
2012, presented a paper there. So it's been at least, right, a decade, right, that we're flirting with, Agnes and, all the scholarship that comes from there, which is just brilliant.
Yeah. Our chapter, Queering Intermediality in Brazilian Cinema, it seeks to explore a gap in research on the history of Brazilian cinema, not only in terms of intermediality, but also in the context of queer studies. We observe a familiarity between intermediate gestures and queer creation, especially in the recognition of the creative power of impurities and hybridities. The text also emerges as a desire to explore the writing of our own queer existence through a queer, undisciplined authorship, discentered by the deviations of a text written by four hands that intertwine while weaving the lines of the text in our own everyday conversations. A queer approach to writing because we can no longer or even wish to define each one's part in a shared thought. We acknowledge that the intersection between queerness and intermediality as an object of research finds a much more prolific ground in recent Brazilian cinema, where intermediality is used to engage creatively with TV, music and theatrical performance, and to challenge normative figurations of Brazilian masculinity and femininity, as well as those of gender, sexuality, and race.
And I would just like to point out here that contemporary Brazilian, not only cinema, but let's say audiovisual production in general, is really a productive ground for this kind of research. Because we have, for example, people like, what's her name again?
Oh my God.
Castiel Vitorino. Castiel Vitorino doing some really groundbreaking work, mashing performance, music, and cinema. So I think that contemporary Brazilian audiovisual production in general is really this kind of playground for people studying intermedial connections in cinema, right? We've recently published an article that has to do with this intermedial issue, although it's not explicitly said there, that where we explore lip syncing in some of Brazilian short films, right? So lip syncing that comes from a variety of other media, theater, music, is already a sort of challenge to what we call cinema in Brazil today. I think that queer production, that this is one of our, I don't know, thesis maybe? Hypothesis.
Why not?
Hypothesis in Brazil today is that we have an extremely prolific intermedial work in queer, recent contemporary queer cinema in Brazil, where performance, music, TV is really enmeshed in this world of I don't know. One of the things that I love about Brazilian queer audiovisual production is that it says, okay, tell me what are you calling cinema nowadays? It's such a great question. And I think intermediality will help us addressing this great challenge. Okay, so this is, of course, a contemporary context, but we have to go back and see it historically, right, Ali?
Yeah, of course.
So we know that queerness itself is less conspicuous. Conspicuous. That's what she said. Conspicuous. That's what she said. In our cinematography, and in our chapter, we attempted, at diving into such difficult subject, and we tried to analyze the role of intermediality in the process of adaptation of a queer novel right? And we try to pay close attention to how the film Ariela, this is the name of the film we analyzed, highlights, transforms, or erases the queerness of Cassandra Hills's novel. Cassandra Hills, who's the author of the novel. In sum, we try to see the extent to which the media and gender borders are patrolled or blurred, right? So this film, Ariela, was directed by John Herbert. It was made in 1980, exactly in the beginning of the decline of the erotic frenzy in Brazilian cinema, because then came the VHS. So pornography and eroticism became a private affair, right? Because when we're talking about this pornography or eroticism in cinema, it was a public affair, right? When you went to the cinema theater, but then the video made it a private affair. So it was exactly in the decline of the public eroticism. And Cassandra Hills was, for those of you who are not aware or you're not familiar with her, she was a prolific lesbian writer in Brazil, and she published over 40 books in 50 years, and she sold more than 1 million copies in Brazil, a country where illiteracy was very high at the time. It's something, So in our chapter, we discuss how queer imagination flows from one medium to the other, from literature to cinema. And we try to point out moments of interdiction, but also we try to highlight the affect that agitates the body with a desire to defy the laws of family bonds in society.
Yeah. Well, we're humbled and honored to be among so many people who read and admire, really, 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 and also very thrilled that we could contribute with a chapter that tackles on the vexed question of queer existences in Brazilian cinema. So important. We are hopefully overcoming one of the darkest moments in our recent history, and being here together, talking about our researches. We must protest the indecent ways education and science have been treated in Brazil in the last 4 years. We must protest the cut in fundings for research, which endangers not only scientific work, but the very lives that depend upon this funding. May our merry, may even be gay meeting today be followed by hope.
Gustavo.
That's it. Thank you, guys.
It's not fair to put me after the two of you because you're just too likable, and I'm bound to underperform. lovely to be with you all. I wasn't part of this project on its full span, and I'm envious of you for the ones who were in it, but very grateful to have been invited to contribute a chapter to this book. Very happy to be in this amazing book, which I've started to read and I'm going to read during winter break. I'm looking forward to having. It's actually a pleasurable read, so I'm looking forward to doing that, getting to know all of your amazing works. So my chapter is about maps and films in the Amazon. It's part of what I'm doing is proposing an approach to cinema in the Amazon in which maps do take center stage to some extent, because films that imagine themselves to be traveling to remote, unseen, unknown places, and I'll emphasize imagine that to be the case, depends for whom, right? That such films invariably are map-like, right? They invariably provide, they fill blank spaces in our mental maps. They provide content for our spatial imaginary, and they also create relations between places, between metropolitan viewers and such remote places, right? And also it's about maps in films, right? The citation of maps in films, which is very abundant in cinema, and in cinema in general, but in cinema in Amazon, it's very abundant in a variety of ways. And I think that those are rarely uninteresting moments. The moments in which maps appear in films, of course, in many of them is this predictable gestures, right? The locational device. But even then, right? How is a map incorporated? Mise en scène, full shot? What kind of map is used? What kind of discourse is wrapped around it? What sort of tensions emerge between images and maps? So films and maps share a kinship, but they also have many differences, and that tension I find really interesting. More specifically, I focus on 1970s in this chapter. I've been writing about this question recently more, but in this chapter I focus on 1970s, which is also a period of, as we all know here, of national integration, of road construction, of an imposition of a sort of imagined spatial logic from the centralized state onto the Amazon, right? But also it's a period when cinema was in a very interesting place in, say, the media map, because it's also the moment when television starts to become hegemonic. And when the place of cinema is in question. So one of the things that I found very interesting in thinking along those lines is how often the citation of maps in films of this period also reflected about media in general. To give you one example, there's a great scene in Bye-Bye Brazil when they arrive in the Altamira bar. I'm sure many of you might remember this. And they've been traveling along the Trans-Amazonian Highway, and then they get to this bar, and it's a total underwhelming experience. And there's a national map on the wall, as well as a television set, right? And so there's this staging of a relation between film and territorial maps, between forms of imagining space, but also a staging of cinema's relationship with other visual media in addition to maps. The chapter focuses on Bye-Bye Brazil and Os Arara by Andrea Tonacci, two very, very distinct films, and shows them in part because of that tension between them. Travel similar spaces, but do very different things with them. Os Arara cites maps obsessively, incorporates obsessively. And I also think a little bit about Annabella Geiger's Mapas Elementares, her video work, because I think Os Arara is a film that, in a sense, it fails at doing everything it tries to do, and that's why it's so great. It is not quite documentary film. It is not quite television work. It is not quite video art. It somehow does a little bit of all that and keeps on citing maps along the way. So I think that's all I got. It's really nice to be here. I haven't spoken for too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo, and I want to thank all the book contributors here who've given beautiful introductions to their chapters and given us a lot to think about and go and read. I'm now going to bring back Luciana, Lucia, Tiago, Agnes, Cecilia, and Julian for some brief final remarks. If you want to communicate with them during the remarks, put them in the chat and we'll put them up on screen. So bear with me as I switch the placements of everyone very quickly here. And one more person to add and take away, excuse me. Bear with me. Green room. Julian comes back. And Julian is back. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Now some final remarks from all of you. You can go in any order you want or just go ahead and speak. So thanks a lot.
Okay, let me just say a quick word here. First of all, I can't believe that Agnes, Julian, and Cisa are still there after this very long presentation of the book. It was so good to listen to everyone, but I was so pleased with the comments that you raised about the book. Agnes bringing that very important question of the connection, the passage between the intermedial space and reality, this travel that we do, and the connection between art and life that she inspires us so much to think about, and the fact that this being focused on a national cinema, the novelty of that, and then all the remarks that she has done about the papers that she has read, the chapters that she has read in the book. Cisa finished, sorry, I'm calling her by the nickname we normally call her, so I hope you don't mind, Cisa. But Cisa brought the notion of heterotopia as an opposition to the totality that we may be confronting it with. And she brought the idea of failure in cinema, deficiency of cinema, as again comparable with the imperfection of reality, the deficiencies of reality itself. So you launched the question about the heterotopic state, and perhaps that should be the next stop for us in terms of developing this book and thinking about it. I don't have an answer now. Perhaps Luciana or Tiago would have. It's a question that I need to think about, but certainly the imperfection of cinema as mapping the deficiency of life goes very much along the lines of what Consuelo Lin said about Coutinho, impurity as being life itself, again because life is incomplete until it's not life anymore, it's death. So I think it's a very important point and makes me think, and probably my colleagues will be thinking about that too. Julian brought again 3 points that he highlighted at the end. What is the in-between space between transnational and the intermedial? I think that's a very, very good question. So we approach the national cinema, but national cinema might be an essentializing idea about cinema, because all cinemas are in connection with each other, and there is this porosity, this intersection. Any films that we talk about in Brazil were in dialogue with cinemas elsewhere, so with American cinema, with third cinema elsewhere, with marginal cinemas, with experimental cinema, so that there isn't that purity. So it is a very, very important question that leads to your second question about Japan in the 1960s and the art theory that you so well explored, including the notion of landscape and so many other theories that again de-essentialize the intermedial approach to cinema, because it encompasses other arts which are intermedial. Once you start talking about intermediality, it becomes very complicated to talk about one single medium. But I think in your thesis, you also say that in order for you to talk about intermediality, and Rajewski also says that, you need to define a medium first. You need to have a prevailing medium, I think. And it's important that you know, because that you know what is prevailing, or the medium that is on top of the others, or is sucking from other mediums. But when you go to more modern projects like the expanded cinema that you talked about, then even this notion of the prevailing medium is dissolved. Installations and these experimental projects that you work with. So yes, another question for us to work with. And you then mentioned the example of Ismail commenting on Arnaldo Jabor's adaptation of Nelson Rodrigues, in which the theater of Nelson Rodrigues was also been influenced by the language of cinema. So it's like a short circuit there. So very interesting points that you three have made, which show that our book is really towards and hasn't arrived yet wherever it wants to go. And I do hope that we can continue this conversation. Yeah, I would love to go back to looking at Japanese cinema, for example, or looking at all these films that Agnes so well comments. I love the way she explores Godard, for example, and just looking at the last film by Godard before his death, he's back to deforming and transforming films by others. So we are back to some intertextuality, but he's also so intermedial. And Cisa, with her study of Chinese cinema, again, it's another universe of intermediality that is so fascinating. And she has written about not just opera and film, which is a more obvious kind of intermediality, but gardens and the Chinese garden and cinema, which is a complete novelty. I'll stop here. So and pass on to my colleagues. I think that Luciana has moved to the YouTube, but she could come back and join us here. In the meantime, maybe Tiago could say something.
Thank you, Lucia. I don't really have much else to contribute. I think you've already covered everything. I just wanted to thank Cecilia, Agnes, and Julian for their very thought-provoking and attentive readings of the book. And I also wanted to show the book because it was actually, I think Consuelo had the book in the background, but I don't think the book has been shown. So let me show here. And the figure that is on the cover of the book is from Carl Guimarães' Figuras na Paisagem. And I think we should André Parentes. André Parentes. Sorry, I'm mixing things up here. So I think we should also acknowledge that, and that is in the chapter by Martine Bonnier. So I just wanted to show that.
Hey, some people in the chat were asking for the link for the book. Most unfortunately, this book is not open access, and if you are to go through the legal ways, you have to pay £96 for a copy of the book. But if you write to me, send me a private message, and I can share the link with you.
Yeah, we have the link on the screen now. Everyone can see it, and you can copy and paste it in the chat and get access to that. And perhaps some libraries also have already picked it up, and you can read it at your local library or as an ebook.
But we hope it will become paperback, so in a year's time. So and consequently much more affordable. In the meantime, please order the book for your libraries.
Luciana disappeared. Is she coming?
Yes. Luciana disappeared and has not come back. But perhaps Agnes, Cecilia, or Julian want to also say any parting words for us. And if Luciana comes back, I will put her in the chat.
Yes, I would like to. I'm speechless because it has been a very long book presentation, but I'm very sorry that it will end soon. So it's been so great to see you all. So what I kept thinking about, and maybe I have told you on previous occasions, that all these conferences on intermediality always convince me about this link, not only between intermediality and life, but actually research networks which are connections, real life connections, even mediated through screens between people from different parts of the world. So we do connect through our thoughts, through our words, through our texts, but also this is a human connection. So it's been great, and it's also been great reading the book because knowing many of you personally, you can feel the person behind the words. So
thank you.
It was wonderful, and let's hope that we will continue.
Or can I just say, Agnes, that you were probably cited in literally every chapter in this book. So,
I'm really
yes, I'm not really exaggerating. Yes. So we should all thank you for all your work.
Project.
Yeah, I think this time Bazan is second to you, Agnes.
Well, sorry, folks. Sorry, guys. I lost connection, but I won't. I'm sorry if I repeat someone, but I want to thank very much all our brilliant guests and just say that you gave wonderful ideas for a second volume. So thank you very much.
And yeah, it was a real pleasure. Learned a lot. Thank you so much. And the book is, there's a pile here. There's some books here. There's Lucia's new book. It's not, I mean, it's exactly as it was. I'm not joking, right? This is Lucia's book again. Oh, here it is, Agnes' book. Look, with lots of post-it notes, as you can see. So now this one is also here. So it's like the easiest reach for me. I just go like this. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just to quickly say thank you so much, everybody. It was a pleasure to learn through your words, and I hope to continue to read your scholarship on Brazilian cinema and intermediality. It's been a pleasure to see everybody's faces, familiar ones and new ones. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me for this presentation.
Thank you. And thanks to our faithful audience that stayed with us for so long and spent such a long time with us here. It was a real pleasure and honor for us to have you with us from so many different places in the world. Thank you very much indeed.
And to William for organizing everything.
Oh, William.
Yes.
What a star. Thanks, William.
You were all great. It was a real honor for us to be the host of this event, to listen to everyone speak about their chapters and their respective work. Unfortunately, we weren't able to hear about Lucia and Luciana and Tiago's chapters, respectively, but everyone should check out those in addition to everyone who was not able to attend the event today. And I think with that, it's probably a good moment to wrap the broadcast. I just want to thank again all of the contributors who are here with us, not on screen, but below screen, and the editors and our guest speakers as well. Everyone had such beautiful things to say. And I think, as Lucia said, or Luciana, there's definitely enough material for a second book here. So hopefully 4 years from now, or however long it took you to put this one together, we can see a round two of this beautiful book. And with that, Stefan also, who is not currently, I kicked him out of the room to make space. He says thanks, and he also thanks everyone for bringing it together and the editors. So I want to shout him out as well. With that, I think I'm going to end the broadcast. Thank you to the audience for tuning in, and thank you for all the contributors.
Thank you.